I conveniently forgot that, but it's fine.
Okay. Hi, Tyler.
Hey, Jamie.
How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
We're doing fine. We were all just comparing notes about what a pretty day it turned out to be where many of us are. How is it down where you are?
Same. It's beautiful. It's a shame to be in the office during elk season.
When do you get to go out?
Oh, I think OHA is pretty lenient. I think I'll be heading out tomorrow.
Yeah. Hi, Jim. You're muted, but I want to hear how the weather is where you are. There you go.
Nice this morning. Cold, but supposed to be super cold tonight.
Yeah, down below, I mean, like single digits or teens, or what are you talking about?
Teens.
Have you had much snow?
Oh, it was snowing here just a few minutes ago, just a little bit.
Oh,
Up high, we've been getting some snow. Rain down low, lots of rain.
yeah. Yeah, we had some snow in the foothills here. Oh, probably about a week ago, and it stayed for quite a bit, and then it just got that warm weather and it all is gone. So, hi, Susan. I'm glad you could join us. I think Kelly's going to be listening maybe, but oh, there she is. Kelly's phone. Hi, Kyle.
Hey guys, Lauren will be on, just might be a few minutes.
Okay. Hey, Stan. Well, you're just right connected really quick. Usually I get to see a video, Stan, of your tech support, you know. You are muted though, Stan.
I'm a slow learner, Jamie, but she is actually schooling this old dog.
Yeah, well, it's good to have that kind of in-house support.
Yes, it is.
Hi, Quinn.
Good afternoon.
I have to ask you, Quinn, what tea are you drinking now?
You know I'm always getting tea right about this time.
Me too. That's why I asked.
I'm still drinking my British brunch with milk and honey.
Oh, that sounds nice. I've switched to my Yogi Calm tea, you know. Especially,
I probably should do that.
oh,
Hey, I discovered the Bob's Red Mill mega store in Milwaukee. Has anybody ever been there?
oh yeah,
It's very cool. They've got
it is.
all kinds of grains. They have like a cafeteria with actually good food.
Mhm.
And it's down the road from their headquarters. And in between, of course, is this massive warehouse. And I didn't realize that they send food to 30 countries. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a really,
Wow.
it's a huge company. That, you know, they have this kind of folksy feel to them, but they're big. And but the store is cool. You can see it from the highway. It looks like a big red barn. But I found my favorite hot cereal there that I can't find in the store anymore. It's called Mighty Tasty, and it's gluten-free, multi-grain. Anyway, so I stocked up on that.
Yeah, it's a great place, and on a pretty regular. It's not too far from where I live. I mean, it's like 40 minutes in, but it's on a regular basis. You can, you know, Bob himself will be there. There's a piano upstairs, and he'll like play the piano and sing. And he's got his red cap on and his vest, and it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's like everybody's favorite grandpa. And he's
Mm-hmm.
very wealthy.
We need him on one of our work groups.
Yeah, he can play music for us. I'm gonna get some water.
Okay, I think we've got Bob Salinger is on. I see. Hi, Bob. I know you're there.
Sorry, just had to find the volume. Yes, hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And then I know Kelly's joining us by phone today. And who am I missing here? Oh, Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Yeah, it took me a little bit. Sorry about that. I left a different long Zoom call and had trouble getting reconfigured. Shannon's not able to make the meeting today, so I'll be sitting in for her for the entire meeting.
Okay. That sounds great. And then we also have other Kevin, Kevin C. And Susan is here as the primary for Kelly today, even though Kelly's on the phone. And Kyle is here, but Kyle's expecting Lauren to come, but they haven't shown up yet. And we have a new representative for Association of Working Counties. Her name is Drenda Howitt. And she'll be joining us in December. And I will be meeting with her. She comes up to us from Clackamas County, where she was a policy analyst for the commissioners there. And we have Bianca with us today because Sam and Bianca are both here, but Bianca will be supporting our meeting today. And I'm stalling a tiny bit because usually Bob from ODFW is on early to get us live streaming. And are we live streaming yet, Bianca?
Not yet. This is Sam here. Just
I see.
yeah, just seeing if there's a possibility to live stream via the Crimson West YouTube channel, but I'm having some technical difficulties with that as well. So keep you posted.
Yeah, and are you trying to connect with Michelle to see if what's happened to Bob?
I can reach out to Michelle. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So unfortunately, we are recording, but we're not live streaming just yet. But while we're waiting, let's have Brian introduce himself, because you'll notice that Derek's not here. So Brian, you want to tell us who you are?
Yes, hi, everyone. I'm Brian Wolfer. I'm the Game Program Manager here in the Wildlife Division for ODFW. I've been with the agency for 22, 23 years, about half of that time as a district wildlife biologist, and then in the game program since February. So in the game program, that includes the fur bearer program, game birds, ungulates. And so I'm going to be filling in for Derek while he's away.
Thank you for that, Brian. And then we are also joined by, let's see, who else do I want to tag? Well, Colin is here, and I think, so Colin, I know that you're calling in. How is your connection?
I think it's okay so far. I have 3 bars, so, and it's working.
Okay, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Colin Gillen. I'm the state wildlife veterinarian with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and been with the department for a little over 17 years now, and have worked with many of the folks, Derek and Brian, on a lot of different issues, as well as Kevin, including well, all the veterinary side of issues, including trapping, as well as other animal handling and other issues. So
Thanks for that, Colin. And while we are still stalling just a tad to try to get the live stream going, we've got a couple of updates. So one is that we heard from Bryant White this morning early that he had some travel challenges, and so he is actually going to be in the air during this meeting and unable to join us by phone or at all. And so we've modified the agenda a little bit. We're not going to put Colin in the driver's seat on this topic, but we can talk just a little bit about questions that people have for more information, and see if we want to invite Bryant back for December. So he sends his apologies and regrets And so sometimes that happens. So that's one update. And then the other update is Commissioner Woolley has an update for folks.
Okay, and just a question. So Bryant, tell me again who Bryant.
So
Who's
Bryant White, he was, so you've often heard of the White et al. Reference to the best management practices with the Association of Fish and Wildlife
Okay,
agencies. I think it's the other A. And Bryant is the author of those. And
okay,
so we had talked about having someone come in who can talk with us about the research that's available around trauma related to trapping to help inform the trap check time question that we have in front of us. And we had, Kelly had provided some names, and we talked to the number of different people to see who was available and who would be a good match for the kinds of questions this group had. And Bryant came highly recommended and was available, and is the author of the BMPs that number of people in the group have cited over and over again. And so we met with him last week, and he was on track to come, and then he has his travel issue. So
okay. And then you said Colin is not presenting today? Is that
so
what you said?
Colin was not prepared to present. Colin was here because Colin is out in the field in a remote area and has inconsistent phone access right now. And so he said that it was available for any questions, and he wanted to listen to what Bryant had to share and the conversation that the group had given Colin's role with ODFW, but he wasn't on tap to prepare a presentation with the group today.
Mhm. Okay, so we're kind of putting this off for another meeting, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll have a little bit of, I'll share in a minute when we're live streaming the agenda so that people can, folks can see the agenda as well about the modifications that we made. And so we've got, well, I can go ahead and share it. Bianca, can you go ahead and go to the agenda rather than speaking in generalities? There. So we've got, we sent out the economics of trapping presentation that Derek had given to the ODFW Commission and asked people to take a look at that because there were these outstanding questions around the economics of trapping. And so we've got Kevin and Brian here who can answer any questions related to that. Okay, so it looks like we don't have a live stream for today. And Michelle from ODFW just messaged us that we'll record the meeting, but we won't have a live stream. And I don't know why, and so apologies for that. But the meeting will be recorded. So I guess we'll just carry on. But so here is the, and Michelle will update the webpage to let everybody know, because I'm sure there are people that wanted to tune in that won't be able to. But anyway, so we made a few adjustments to our agenda based on things out of our control that happened today. So we wanted to have this economics of trapping. Any questions and follow-up from Derek's presentation? So kind of a brief agenda item. And then rather than have the presentation about the physiological effects of trapping, we thought maybe we could engage the group in some questions that you're interested in Bryant to answer. I know that Kelly and others had posed some other folks who might want to come. I had a good conversation with Bob about a week or two ago about this topic as well. So I think we could have a little bit of a discussion to kind of hone in on this topic a little bit more. Discuss what questions we might have for Bryant so we can and decide if we'd like to bring him back in December and if there's somebody else we might want to bring. So that's that agenda item. And then I gave you a heads up about this at our last meeting that I thought it would be, we're at the point where we're starting to we need to start to put together recommendations. And I know based on our work together that we need multiple meetings in order to be able to be successful with that. And what we did with the Beaver Work Group at their last meeting is we had them do small group breakout session for about 20-25 minutes with just 3 people. And they had a conversation about merging ideas, and it was that way they could talk more directly with each other. And then we had a large group report out where everybody got to hear highlights of what the small group discussion was. And while people were reporting out, Samantha in our Beaver group, but today Bianca will do this, will populate what we call a Jamboard, which is just a big whiteboard with sticky notes. And she'll be doing that in real time as the report outs are happening. And then we can just start to see all in one place, you know, what are emerging ideas for a slate of recommendations, where there might be areas of agreement, where there are a lot of people thinking the same thing, where there are areas of disagreement, and then have some conversation about that. And then that becomes the framework for us to start, you know, chunking down about recommendations. And so through that discussion, you know, we can you can look at this 310 to 350 agenda item. You know, are there some logical groupings? Are there areas of consensus, some emerging priorities? Are there additional information needs that people have identified? You know, we've had a lot of information shared to date. And so that's that whole chunk of the meeting. And then the last 10 minutes will be around scheduling. We've got some dates that are emerging for our January and February meetings, and then to confirm topics for upcoming meetings. So those are the adjustments that we've made to the agenda. So I'll pause there. And again, we made this, you know, late breaking given things that happened. But what questions or thoughts do people have about the agenda? Does this look like a good way for us to, good modifications, a good way for us to spend our time today? People are pondering. Quinn is nodding vigorously. I appreciate that, Quinn. Thank you. Thumbs up if this looks like we're ready to go. Okay, thanks, Jill. Tyler, thank you. Bob, thumbs up. Greg, what was that? Thumbs sideways? I don't know what that was.
Yeah, I think it's fine for today. I would hope that we would still be able to have a veterinary presentation at some point, since that's what we've, you know, agreed to.
Yeah. Yep, I hope so too.
So I hope, you know, I hope that's not put off indefinitely.
Yeah, Jamie, I would just say that a presentation from Bryant White is, I was really looking forward to that. So I would hope that that would also happen in the future.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Looks like Lauren has joined us. Welcome, Lauren. All right, so with those thoughts, let's go ahead and Bianca, can you go back to the slide that has the, just go all the way back up because we kind of charged through. All right, there we go. Zoom meeting tips, everybody knows, mute and video, and if you can stay on video, that'd be great. We understand if you've got other things that you're doing or, you know, you have a bad connection. Sometimes being off video helps with that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And go to the next one. Everybody's named. We know everybody is. And go to the next one. And go to the next one. Meeting guidelines. Thank you. Same guidelines as we've used all the time. Always good to remind ourselves what those guidelines are. Go ahead and go to the next one. So I wanted to remind us where we are on the schedule. Here we are, November 16th. And we had talked about having the topic of injuries and trauma to wildlife. And so we'll be putting that off to the December meeting. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then you can see we're moving right into drafting recommendations and ideas for recommendations. And so that's really what the balance of our meetings are. And we'll get a run at that today and see kind of where we are. A little bit of a, you know, finger in the wind, kind of test where we are. So that's what today is all about. And one thing I wanted to share with you about the ODFW Commission presentation. We met with staff and commissioners, well, actually Commissioner Woolley here in the last week or two and talking about presentation. And one thing that they brought up that I hadn't actually considered is we were thinking that we would bring both the Beaver work group and the Trap Check work group recommendations forward in the same time frame, but that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. They don't necessarily both have to be there in March. One could be, in February and one in March and one in April. So I just wanted to put that out there just to manage expectations, depending on the recommendations and the presentation and other things on the agenda for the commission meeting. It might be that the items are brought forward on separate times. So we're still working on that, but I just wanted to share with you that one nuance. So any questions about the schedule? We presented this last time. We're working on the January, February dates, and we'll talk about that at the end of the meeting, kind of what's coming out. Okay, well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which I think is getting us into our substance. So there have been a number of questions about the economics of trapping from a couple different perspectives. One was around kind of economics of the program that ODFW administers itself. So, how much money does it bring in? How much does it cost to administer? What are the particulars around that program? That's one aspect of the economics. And that was the subject of the presentation that we sent out that Derek had given to the commission in the past. There was another aspect of economics that was brought up, which was around to the trappers themselves. So, how much revenue are they generating? How many people are active in this? What does that economic side look like? What would be impacted with changes in trap check chimes? What does that look like? So that's that other piece of economics. And there's a third piece of economics that that was brought up, which is around the damage, the economics related to damage control for folks like forest landowners, county roads, farm agriculture users, those kinds of folks. And we're working on getting a conversation together with Kyle and with the Farm Bureau and with AOC to have this discussion about is there some information that they can bring forward around how much they're spending on trapping activities, how much that activity is preventing damage, what they rely on for the on the economic side, for the damage control side of things. We've got some numbers that about how the different counties contract with APHIS, but there was some conversation in this group about having a little bit more comprehensive look at that. And so we're teeing up that discussion, and we might have that in December as well. It depends on the conversation we have with AOC and with Farm Bureau and with Kyle, why can't I think of, with Oregon Forest Resources.
Close.
So,
Oregon
yes.
Forest Industries.
Thank you. I know. It's like it's right there, right on the tip of my tongue. And so that's another set of data that we're working on. So there's really three parts to this economics piece. So the economics of trapping piece for today is really focused on the ODFW program side. And that's what Derek had shared. We hope you watched it. If you have questions about it, Ryan and Kevin are here to answer those questions. So that's a really long way to tee up what this particular topic is. But I just wanted to make sure we were clear what part of the economics question we were addressing today. So do people have questions for Brian or Kevin about what Derek presented, or the economics related to the program management from ODFW? It's a quiet group today. Quinn, I think everybody needs your tea. Perk them up. Kevin, is there anything that you just want to share, about the economics of the program? Or, I mean, people don't have any questions. We don't need to belabor it, but I just didn't know if you had a few things that you wanted to say about it.
No, Jamie, I mean, I appreciate your background about what the kind of the segment, there are lots of different issues about economics of trapping and of the damage. So I appreciated the little bit of dialogue to explain. This was the snapshot looking at program revenues, how the program is managed, what those incomes are, how that relates to how we do our business here in the carnivore fur bearer program. So I mean, certainly able to answer any questions, but I think it was a pretty simple and easy presentation. The fiscal itself that we file when we do rulemaking, it really is about those individuals who partake in fur taking, the licensed individuals. So that's really what the fiscal wraps around there. So, and if we're able to get some of the other information on estimates of damage or just frequency and some of those things, then that's some additional information for the group as well.
Yeah, so we're working on that with trying to get that meeting scheduled and tee that information up to be available for the December meeting. Well, I'm not seeing any hands up or about Derek's presentation, so we can just move right along. So what we had talked about at the last meeting, again, as I teed this up when we met with Bryant and with Colin, we met with Bryant, Colin, and Kevin, a week or two ago. And what I shared with them is that the group was interested to know, really focusing in on research related to trauma, physical and physiological trauma to animals around the length of time they are in a trap. And so we were looking for research. And Tyler, you teed this up at the last meeting about, we really need some scientific basis to help pin our recommendations around. If we're going to be doing something differently, it would be nice to know that there's some, the science behind it. So those were the questions that, we were talking with Bryant about, and that he was prepared to share with the group today. We also followed up on a few suggestions from Kelly, and we talked to Bob, to see if there is a veterinarian that specializes in this from a rehabilitation perspective, or somebody else. And Kelly, I don't know if you're just in listening mode, I can never pronounce, or maybe Susan, the name of the person, Gilbert Perlow?
I think it's Gilbert Proul. That's how but I could be wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did follow up with Gilbert, and he is actually running a big conference next week focused on trapping and trapping practices, and was not available to come and didn't have somebody else that he could recommend. But it's possible that he or someone that he would recommend might be available now that we're going to have this bigger conversation in December. So I thought it might be helpful to hear from the group. Let's narrow in on what are the questions that we have for these experts that we want to bring in, so we can really help them be prepared. Susan?
Yeah, thanks so much. I guess I just wanted to start out by asking if Bryant White is a neutral voice on this matter, just given his position. He was interviewed on a website called The Truth About Fur, and his best management practices was funded in part by the fur industry. And it's pretty clear when you read the best management practices, his support for trapping. So I'm just not sure that he's a neutral voice. And as far as I'm aware, he's not a veterinarian. So if we're looking for a neutral voice on the trauma of trapping with regards to, from a veterinarian, I don't believe that he would fill that position.
Right. Yeah, he is not a veterinarian. And as far as a neutral voice, I think that's a good question for him to ask, but for you to ask him. But I would say that, he is working on he does develop best management practices for the trapping industry. And so so it is definitely through that lens. And I think our hope was to have somebody who could speak to the best management practices and the research side and have a veterinarian. And so we just, we fell short on the veterinarian side. Quinn?
Yeah, I think a question I have for, whoever we have on this topic, we've framed it here as the physical and physiological effects of trapping, but what we're really talking about is, do live creatures feel pain when they're in a trap? And I'm wondering, if whoever's presenting on this can talk about how you can even ethically study that. Like, how would you set up a study that could actually measure that in a way that was ethical?
Yeah, and I know we had some conversation with Colin about that as well, and that's where I think it would be we wanted to get a researcher, a veterinarian researcher in who could share with us about, does this research even exist, about that the length of time an animal is in a trap, that this is, the trauma that they experience, and this is how it informs the time that we want to discuss in terms of recommendations. And yeah, we were coming up short with that. So I don't know that it exists, so I think your question is right, Quinn. And so we were trying to get at, what research is available to help inform this conversation. And if it doesn't exist, what would be helpful. So those were the issues. That's how we were framing it. And we were, trying to shop around and see who might be out there to help us answer those questions. Greg?
Okay, so I think I mentioned this before. So I would like the presenter to talk about mammals and talk about the physical characteristics that we all share, that people share with mammals, that mammals share with people, our nervous systems, for instance, in response to pain. There's been research for decades about how mammals respond to pain. I've studied that myself when I was in college. So there's a large body of research. It may not pertain to trapping per se, but I think as Quinn mentioned, we're talking about response to pain. And so there's been work, since the early 1900s about that. So, that can be dug up if needed. But again, taxonomically, we're in the same class, of mammals. And that's because the makeup of our bodies is very similar. And so I would like a veterinarian to be able to address that during a presentation.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Bob?
Thanks. I guess I'm surprised that we actually have to have this conversation, to be completely candid with you. In some ways, it turns the basic precepts of animal care on its head. We've been taking care of captive wild animals for a very long time, and you go through any kind of permitting process at the state or federal level for facilities or people with custody of wild animals, and all the provisions require that you provide basic needs: food, water, shelter, protection from predators. I work under rehabilitation licenses from the state of Oregon and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If I didn't provide those things every day, I would be shut down. If you have a falconry permit, you'd be shut down. If you're transporting a wild animal from one facility to another, you have requirements here. And so I guess I'm just sort of surprised that we have to go back and prove that deprivation of the basic needs for survival is problematic for these animals. Now, it's one thing for us to ask the question, do we make an exception from these provisions that are in virtually every single other state or federal permit for holding animals for trapping, because it's just not practicable to do those things on a daily basis? That's a reasonable question. But I think going back to sort of this basic question of, not providing animals with their basic needs, whether that's okay or not, or whether doing that for a longer period of time relative to a shorter period of time is more problematic or less problematic, to me just doesn't make any sense. And I look right to ODFW on this one, because ODFW, and I've sat on enough of these committees to know this, requires that facilities and people with custody of wild animals provide these things every single day. You go through your own permits and look at your permit provisions. This is standard. So why are we spending time on it in this process to reprove what is really accepted basic care for a wild animal?
Thanks for that, Bob. I don't have mean, I don't have an answer necessarily. I think those are points or that the group should consider about, how we want to spend our time. I mean, it was brought up at the last meeting by Tyler, and Greg not seconded it, but supported it, that we should have some research that shows from a scientific basis, that, what happens to an animal when they're in a trap for longer periods of time. And so that's what we were just trying to unearth.
No, and I understand that, Jamie. I understand why the question's being asked, but I think we need to go back to sort of basics on this one and really think about it as to, what basic accepted standards of care for animals are. It's so many different levels, and there's so much regulatory structure around this. Trapping is really an outlier on this issue, even with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife system. And I just worry that we're going to go down a rabbit trail here of trying to prove that an animal left without water for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days is more harmed, and so on and so forth. When really, I think that kind of stuff has to be stipulated at this point in time. I think it's just common sense that animals that are deprived and exposed for longer periods of time are at greater and greater risk. And the question really is, how do we minimize that risk to the greatest degree practicable, whether that there is really a risk there to that animal. And again, I really point you to the fact that if I went to ODFW as a rehabilitator and said, hey, I don't want to really follow your regulations anymore because it's just not practical for me to feed, water, and shelter these animals on a daily basis. So I'm going to do it every 3 days or 5 days. ODFW would pull my permit. I mean, it wouldn't be a question. It wouldn't be a matter of proof. It would simply be a matter of, come on, that's not reasonable. And you're putting these animals at risk, and it's unacceptable.
Yeah, and Bob, I know that when we talked a week or two ago, one of the things that you and I were exploring was the intent of the trapping. And so, there's kind of separating out. I mean, if you're trapping in a live trap, I'm not sure what is actually required right now. If you're trapping a live trap for either predator control or fur bearing, what is allowed in terms of, what's required in terms of the, what's offered for the animal in that trap versus a kill trap. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to sort out is, length of time. I mean, if a kill trap is set improperly, or it's an unintended catch, or that the animal is not killed right away. What's the responsibility of the trapper to make sure that the animal isn't languishing? So kind of zeroing in on that and what that means to the trap check times, and then the other part of the live trap and what's required of trappers for live trapping. I don't know if that's different for if you're trapping for research or trapping for fur or trapping for predator, on the live trap side. So unpacking that, I think, would be really helpful.
Well, and I agree with you, Jamie. I mean, I think there you're getting into a practicability standard of what's practical given these different approaches and what the risks are, what the likelihood that you're capturing something that's non-target in a kill trap. Those, I think, are very appropriate topics for conversation. What I don't think is appropriate is in this context, and I don't want to be disrespectful here, but in having to actually prove to a committee that animals deprived of basic needs for extended periods of time is harmful. I think that's a given at this point, that if you're not providing for animals basic needs for extended periods of time, that does put them at risk and increasing risk as time goes on. And I think we ought to be able to stipulate that the longer an animal that goes without food, water, shelter, and is exposed to potential predation, the greater the potential for harm is over time. I don't think we need a veterinarian to tell us that. And I think we can look to established regulatory structures, and there are so many of them out there to look to, that this is a basic standard of care that is accepted as the norm. Anyways, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, we don't want you to be quiet, Bob. Thanks for sharing that. So Susan, your hand is up.
Yeah, so
and actually, Susan, I just want to alert everybody, we are now being live streamed. Bob did join us, Bob Swingle. So hello, audience. We are well into our meeting, and we had to make a slight adjustment in our agenda because Bryant White was not able to join us today. So we're talking about the physiological effects of trapping and the questions that we have about that, and how much or little we want of a presentation around that topic at a December meeting. So that just to bring you up to speed, that's where we are. Sorry, Susan, go ahead.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to make it clear that there is ample evidence in the published literature about the effects of trapping on animals in terms of trauma. With regards to, whether or not an animal is more inclined to be suffering the longer it is held in a trap, there is actually the literature does touch on that a bit. There's greater muscle damage as a result of prolonged struggling. Anxiety caused by confinement can decrease subsequent survival rates. So I think it's important to look at the literature, and I've pulled together some studies, and I'd be happy to pass them around. I just pulled some excerpts out of the literature and put together a document. So I don't know, Jamie, if you'd be willing to share it with the group. And I'd be happy to talk through this research with anyone. And I put links to the research in the actual document, so you can read the studies yourselves.
Thanks for that, Susan. So I'm gonna call on Tyler. Actually, I'm gonna call on Jim because his hand's up. And then Tyler, I'm gonna put you on deck because you're the one that at the last meeting brought up about, it's like, hey, we really need to understand the research side of this. So think about that request from your last meeting a little bit. And I want you to be able to just talk about that in light of the conversation we're having right now. Jim?
There's a whole nother side to this trapping. And I'm going to give you an example here. Last year, I had to go to Montana and work, and I did not trap coyotes in my area. As a result, there's an excess of coyotes. And what I'm finding is about 50% of the coyotes I'm catching have been bitten, chewed by other coyotes. So although, I check my traps every other day and do everything I can, to not hurt these animals. But by trapping these coyotes, in my opinion, you're creating a better environment for the larger population as a whole. You're not getting all the damage to the young coyotes. The young coyotes that are getting chewed on. It's the older coyotes that are dominant, and they're chewing the heck out of the younger coyotes. And I wish I could show you some of the wounds that they're causing. So although we might cause some pain to a few coyotes that you trap, you're probably saving the overall population a lot of pain and agony. So keep in mind that there's this side of it too.
Thanks for that, Jim. Tyler, is it all right if I put you on the spot?
Always. Yeah, I think it'd be prudent that we don't assume. I mean, we all know what happens when we assume that animals being left in trap longer, right, are potentially less fit to survive after being released from a trap. But I just think learning from the professionals that have studied this for decades is important for this group. I think that there are questions that we can ask him or another co-author about the feasibility of learning more about what animals feel in traps. And that's why I was excited to see this presentation. And I think we do need to hear it from the professionals, from the experts. Because as far as I know, and there aren't this level of expertise on this committee in terms of animal welfare as it relates to trapping. That's why I'm in favor of this presentation.
Bob?
I'll respectfully disagree with you here, Tyler. I think we're proving the obvious, and I'll speak from the perspective of being a wildlife rehabilitator that's overseeing the care of somewhere around 100,000 wild animals over the course of my career. And I think it would be unethical to deprive an animal of basic needs for extended periods of time if there is a potential to avoid that situation when you have animals in your custody. So whether that animal can survive being post-release is one question, but whether that animal is suffering during that time period when you deprive it of food, water, create situations where it's being exposed and at risk of predation, I don't think is something that we need to prove. And I also don't think it's a place, and I'd love to hear from ODFW on this, that ODFW really wants to go, because if in fact the situation is one in which we're saying we need proof that basic animal care needs to be provided, do we want to go back and revise all the other permits that ODFW has currently for animal care? Do we really want to revisit the question of whether ODFW wants to require basic animal needs when we have them in our custody? I think the science and in this case, I think common sense dictates that we don't need to go back and reprove this. And I would just refer people to Oregon law, in statutes and rules regarding animal care. We don't debate this in other forums as to whether basic care should be provided.
So I'm getting kind of mixed signals a little bit from the group that on the one hand, I heard Greg and a few others say that it would be helpful to hear from a veterinarian to talk about the kind of the research side of when an animal is left without care in a trap for longer and longer periods of time, that it's a problem for them. So I'm hearing some people say they want that. And then I'm also hearing from some folks that, it's like not necessary, it's common sense. We can agree that the longer an animal languishes in a trap, the more harmful it is. And then so that's one side of it. And then the other part of the conversation is around the BMPs and the work that Bryant White has done together, to help offer guidance to states around trapping practices and what their research is based on and how often that they change their update their BMPs. And so that's another piece. Seems like these are separate topics, and so anyway, I think I'm hearing that there's support to hear from Bryant about the BMPs and take a little bit deeper dive, maybe not, exhaustive, but just get him there. I know that there've been questions asked about him and about his work at previous meetings from all sides of the issue. But so that's one piece that we've teed up. But the veterinarian side and the research side of it, if we can just talk about that just a little bit more and just settle on, do we want to hear from somebody about this for a little bit? Do we want to just, Susan offered some information to share. Bob, you shared with me information from the American Veterinary Association about, that they have on their website about, about trapping and about their positions on information and a literature review about trapping and the effects of trapping, particularly on leg hold. So I'm just putting it out there. We need to know where you want to go with this topic. So Bob, your hand is still up if you want to say something more, and then Kevin's hand is up.
Only that I'd be interested in hearing from ODFW on this issue, because they have lots of regulations that require basic care.
So, well, Brian or Kevin, if you guys can sort out which one of you wants to address that, I'll hear from Kevin and then Jill. Kevin?
Well, I can lower my hand if you want them to go first, but I can certainly share my thoughts here and give them a moment to kind of.
I don't think anybody wants to go first. I don't think anybody wants to go first. But we got to get this, we got to figure this out because we need to know what direction the group wants to go to. So if you got something to offer, put it out there.
No. And a conversation related to some of the researchers related to the B&B studies. I mean, one thing that I do want to at least confirm is they chose to look at injury and then they rated those injuries on a scoring system based on various factors. But part of what they did is they did whole necropsies. And so they didn't just look at the injury of the foreleg where they were trapped and the injuries there. They also then looked at the entire health of the animal. And so I think that's an important aspect. And again, it gets to the comment that Bob and others have raised as far as duration. And that's a good topic to be raised. But as far as looking at the trap injuries, I think there's a value, like Tyler's asked, to look at understanding how they took that data, how they evaluated that data, and understanding the perspective that they looked at, because there's a fair bit that they did in being able to derive to that point. And then to the comments that are being made, I think that there's valid concern, and certainly from a professional standpoint, that we're trying to minimize the harm and impact to animals. And part of our goal is to strive to decrease the amount of time that animals do spend in there. And I mentioned it in prior discussions. I just kind of want to reiterate again, we look at the trap check intervals, and we are looking at what is that worst case scenario. And that's appropriate to look at what is the maximum amount of time that an animal could spend in there. But I do want to revisit or just restate that the majority of the traps are going empty, that their animals aren't being caught in every trap set, and that there's a duration. So you're checking traps that are empty before you get to a trap that has an animal captured. And so there's a caution to look at and put parameters in place to minimize risk and harm. But we're also looking at the perspective that we're also anticipating those traps to not always be full to have an animal captured. And so looking at worst case scenario, yes, an animal could be in a trap for a prolonged period of time. And that's certainly what we want to minimize. But I think there's caution to say, put measures in place that would say that you would have to check, even though you're most likely to always have an empty trap. And so I just think that needs to be part of that discussion, that yes, we want to minimize an animal, food, water, shelter. Those are important facets for all animals, all mammals, all wildlife. So we want to be able to look at that, but realize that they're not always going to be in those traps when a trapper gets there. And so having a time interval doesn't guarantee that you're going to have something. I'm rambling at that point. So, but I think it's worth to hear what Bryant has, just to explain the aspect of how they evaluated the injuries and how they put that into injury scores, just to understand that aspect of it.
So are you saying, Kevin, that there's a, kind of a formula approach to, that as trappers, that there's a percentage of traps that are going to be empty, and that plays into the amount of time that the industry allows animals to be in a trap because of that percentage of time that the traps are empty? I'm trying to understand what you just said.
No, I appreciate the clarifying question. I'll let Jim kind of speak to him from the aspect of fur harvest, but it's almost in the same perspective. You want to be able to capture the animal. That's why you're setting a trap, whether that's for fur harvest or whether for that's damage prevention. You're wanting to have the animal in the trap, and the quicker that you have the animal in the trap means the quicker you can move on to the next scenario, whether that's for fur harvest or whether a damage situation. And so unnecessarily trapping for longer periods is not productive, right? And so you're trying to maximize your productivity and your efficiency and effectiveness. And if you have a high confidence that you're likely to have that trap, you can check it in a shorter duration and be one and done and be ahead of what you're trying to accomplish. And use for case in point, if we're trying to trap nutria out of urban areas in some of these restoration projects, we literally can set a cage trap for hours, check it, and remove a nutria within hours. And that's much more efficient, because we can actually then, if we have other locations to go, we can come back to those traps a few times a day and actually capture multiple nutria from those traps. So that increases our efficiency in trying to accomplish the task versus, waiting to come back the following day. But there's times when, like I explained in our last call, where your experience and even what some of the literature supports, when you have those alpha coyotes, those experience that may be trap wise or just experience, they know their geographic area and they have an avoidance behavior, your experience is going to tell you those coyotes, what they do is they actually will completely avoid, but over a period of time, they eventually start to work themselves closer and closer to where that trap is until they lower their caution level enough to where they're going to finally investigate that site. There's a smell there, you've got a lure, and they finally get to that trap to when then they will get captured. And so when you're looking at that and you have a circumstance, if you keep going back to that site, some sites you can observe with binoculars from a distance, but given geographic, that's always not going to be capable in all given situations. And when you're trapping for damage, you're not always trapping in the ideal location for your efficiency. You're trapping to address damage, and often that puts you in locations that aren't convenient. And so that's what I was trying to get to, that you can always check it sooner if it's trying to promote an efficiency, but to go and check a trap repeatedly that's going to be empty, that's not promoting efficiency. And so that's why that experience, when you look at years of experience in trapping, you really know what you take and anticipate, even though you can't predict. Based upon your experience, experienced trappers really can anticipate what sets are most likely to produce right away, and which sets they're like, yeah, that's going to take a little while. That's going to be a few checks before that cat or that species, that coyote, comes to that site. And it's not predictive. It's just based upon that experience of what you're likely to predict and see. I don't know if Jim is still on. Yeah, he's there. I don't know if he wants to say anything different to that, but I would think we have some similar thoughts in the process.
Jim, you were invited here by Kevin do you have something to add? You're still on mute.
There we go. Yeah, I totally agree, Kevin. You're gonna, if you get, 5% of your traps with a catch, you're doing well. I went through my traps today. They were all froze up. I didn't catch a thing.